How much did people support the war? George Bernard Shaw's anti-war pamphlet was released, and a politician named Ramsay MacDonald resigned. Casualties lessened support in 1916, and anti-war poets were assigned to make poems about being anti-war. So, how did they use newspapers as a form of propaganda? Newspapers were the main source of information at the time. Initially, they weren't allowed at the front, but they were given some access later on in the war. They only used positive language. Cabinet leaders and politicians owned the newspapers so they could twist the stories and make people believe that the war was more positive than it seemed. All sides had official photographers at the front. The photographers got controlled as to what could be photographed. Initially, they were not allowed to photo the dead or dying. Official war artists were appointed from 1916 to provide paintings for back home. Cartoons were made throughout the war. In the first year of war, between 2 to 5 million of 110 different posters were issued. They were powerful as there was no TV or internet. They focused on persuading people to volunteer and telling the story. Cartoons were made throughout the war, for example, Britain's effort in 1918. The most famous film was the Battle of the Somme in 1916. This was shown in August 1916 when the battle was still happening. A lot of it was shot in a UK studio. The film was hugely successful. Many authors signed a declaration by authors in support of the war, including Arthur Conan Doyle and Rudyard Kipling. They produced patriotic publications for no fee. The University of Oxford produced a 5-volume Red Book explaining why Britain was justified in going to war.
So how did war affect women? First of all, the women never had the initial role, but since there wasn't enough employees because all the men went to work, they had to go to work in places such as the factories and shops, so people could get their daily usage and people at war could get their ammunition, etc. But one thing the women were afraid of is that they would bring down the wages and steal men's jobs, and the Prime Minister at the time assured the women that the wages would be protected, and when the men come back from the war, they would get their jobs back. Another good point about the World War I, when women were in charge, is the White Feather movement by the suffragettes marching. They created the White Feather movement. World War I had a huge impact for women because, first of all, one of the major impacts on the World War I for women was women getting the vote, and that was a huge time for the women since they've been rioting and trying to get the vote for women for a long while. But during World War I, they began the food shortages and rent became stricter, so people would have to pay on time or else they'll be evicted. After World War I, at the start of World War I, there was only 5 million women employed, but after there was 6 million women employed, and that had a huge impact on women, because then after World War I, they were being treated equally. And thank you.
How was Britain organised for the war? Defence of the Rearm Act, or DORA, gave the government the power to bypass. The government took over industries such as the coal industry. The coal industry was taken over in 1914, and the railways was also taken over. To help these industries, the government introduced extra profit. Ministries of munition were set up and run by Lloyd George. In 1913, Britain imported a lot of its food, but the German U-boats were sinking 1 in 4 Britain merchant ships. After that, food shortages became common. To solve the food shortages, Lloyd George set up committees to turn land into farmland and created 3 million acres and increasing wheat and potato crops. The main changes happening to Britain at this time is that DORA was introduced to give the government emergency power, and 3 million acres of farmland was created.
Shelling and bombing. Alright, here's the deal. So, if we have a look at total war is where everyone is included. This means civilians would be working as well. So if they're not fighting in the army, so women at this time, they'd be working in factories, like munition factories. There was a German bombing campaign, so England was being constantly bombed by the Germans. But only the coastal towns would be affected by the German Navy's strikes. Zeppelins were used by the Germans. They carried lots of bombs, but moved very slowly and were mainly used as a fear factor to scare the British citizens. Gotha and giant bombers were faster and harder to intercept. They were painted red to increase the fear factor. That's what an explosion looks like.
Recruitment and conscription.
Officers set up in every town to get men to volunteer for the army.
They wanted 1 million men, but had 250,000 men.
In the first month, 500,000 men had joined. By March 1919, 2.5 million men had joined.
That's a lot of people in it. 1 in 3 men were conscripted between 1916 and 1918.
This means that they didn't actually sign up for the war, but the government did for them.
People who did not want to fight were assigned non-combatant roles, like driving ambulances and mining.
Effective propaganda campaigns happened because men did not want to join up for the war. Men escaped from boredom and low-paid jobs. If the men didn't want to go to war and they refused, they would be put in prison.
Thank you for listening.